The midday sun spread a pale gold over the Persian Gulf, flattening shadows and glinting off the canopies of the aircraft in perfect formation. 2 American F-16 Fighting Falcons led the group, their sleek gray bodies catching the light, followed by the angled lines of British Typhoons and the graceful curves of French Rafales. The formation was deliberate, a geometric display of precision and cooperation, the kind of visual that military planners knew would look flawless on television. Below, the dark silhouettes of NATO naval vessels cut steady paths through calm blue water, their decks dotted with crew who glanced skyward between duties. Satellite dishes on the ships pivoted with mechanical precision, keeping pace with live broadcast links that carried the feed to control rooms thousands of miles away. Inside the cockpits, pilots adjusted throttles in tiny, measured increments, maintaining spacing down to fractions of a second. Their voices moved over radio frequencies in a calm, clipped rhythm, confirming headings, speeds, and altitude. It was a professional cadence, the kind honed through endless training, where every syllable had its place. On the carriers, technicians in soundproofed compartments monitored the same voices on headsets, logging the routine affirmations with the detachment of habit. From orbit, satellites swept their lenses over the scene, capturing high-resolution images of the formation against the steady shimmer of the sea. The feeds traveled through layers of encrypted systems before appearing on wall-sized screens in NATO operations centers. In those rooms, analysts leaned over keyboards, their expressions more administrative than expectant. The mission was, after all, a show of presence, not a combat engagement. The weather was perfect for the task. The air was warm but stable, with a slight haze at the horizon that blurred the line between sky and water. The sea state was calm, no more than a light chop, the kind that looked almost artistic when filmed from the low angles of news crews aboard the vessels. Cameras rolled from multiple positions on the flight decks, from helicopters shadowing the group, and through the long lenses of international media stationed on support ships. Every detail had been considered to send a quiet, controlled message NATO was watching. NATO was present. NATO could be patient. The symbolism was layered into the geometry of the flight itself. Each jet's position reinforced the image of unity, different nations' aircraft flying wingtip to wingtip with perfect symmetry. The naval vessels below mirrored the pattern, their wakes forming parallel lines across the surface. From the air, the shapes looked deliberate enough to be drawn with a ruler. Yet, beneath the calm, there was an undercurrent of awareness that any display could invite a challenge. The Gulf had seen enough incidents to remind even the most disciplined crews that peace on the surface could shift without warning. For now, though, the mission remained exactly as planned. The pilots flew their measured paths, the ships maintained course, and the cameras captured the scene in sharp clarity. It was a tableau of control, a carefully staged performance of strength that wow. In the minds of those watching, it was a moment of calm. In reality, it was the fragile quiet that exists just before the first sign of disruption. The first warning came as a calm, almost detached report from the radar operator aboard the lead NATO vessel. Multiple fast-moving contacts had appeared on the eastern edge of the scope, advancing from Iranian airspace with deliberate speed. The icons multiplied quickly, confirming more than half a dozen inbound aircraft. In the cockpits of the American F-16s, British Typhoons, and French Rafales, the incoming signatures appeared on tactical displays as sharp red markers closing the distance in seconds. Identification protocols confirmed them Iranian F-14 Tomcats and F-4 Phantoms, older platforms but still capable, especially in the hands of seasoned pilots. The lead F-14 broke into view first, a flash of swept wings and glinting metal against the blue. Without hesitation, it rolled inverted and descended toward the NATO formation. In the lead American F-16, the pilot's head tilted instinctively to track the maneuver, eyes narrowing as the Tomcat leveled out just beneath his belly, so close the pilot could see the rivets on its fuselage. For 10 long seconds, the Iranian aircraft held its inverted position directly under the F-16, a brazen act that ignored every unspoken rule of professional separation. The Tomcat's pilot looked up through his canopy, the mirrored visor hiding any expression, yet the act itself radiated mockery. Radio calls from NATO cockpits sharpened in tone. Lead requests permission to reposition. Negative. Maintain current formation. Rules of engagement were absolute: no aggressive action unless fired upon. Every pilot knew them, and so did the Iranians. That was the point. The F-14 broke away, climbing above the NATO group in a smooth arc, then rolled into a perfect barrel roll around the entire formation. It passed over the Typhoons, dipped between the Rafales, and completed the circle. Afterburners blazing. The move was so clean it felt choreographed, a predator circling its prey not to attack, but to show the world how helpless they were. From the decks below, cameras caught every frame. Within minutes, the footage hit live broadcasts. News anchors adjusted their scripts mid-sentence, voices tightening as they narrated the unprecedented aggression. Analysts were patched in over split screens, trying to frame the incident as posturing, while social media erupted with raw, unfiltered reaction. Hashtag NATO Humiliated began trending across multiple platforms, with short clips of the inverted pass and barrel roll looping endlessly. The comments split between outrage and derision, but the tone was universal. NATO had been shown up, and the world was watching. The Iranians pressed the advantage. A second Tomcat roared in from the port side, passing so close to a British Typhoon that its jet wash jolted the NATO fighter violently, forcing the pilot to fight the controls for stability. The turbulence wasn't just felt, it was heard. Rattling metal, panels, and sending a low shudder through the airframe. From the Typhoon cockpit came another clipped call for clearance to respond. Negative. Maintain position. A Phantom came from below, climbing directly ahead of a French Rafale, crossing so close that the Rafale's nose had to tilt back to avoid a collision. In the French pilot's helmet, the horizon swung upward in a way that violated every instinct, every defensive habit. Still, the order stood no engagement. Down on the ships, sailors and media crews stared upward, watching the dance play out against the cloudless sky. Lenses tracked every aggressive move, the contrast between NATO's rigid formation and the fluid, taunting movements of the Iranians creating an unmistakable narrative. The air above the Gulf had become a stage, and the Iranians controlled the choreography. In the cockpits, NATO pilots gripped their sticks harder, their breathing controlled but their thoughts anything but calm. They could match the moves. They could turn the tables in seconds. But the rules were unshakable, and the Iranians knew it. Every inverted pass, every turbulent wake was another reminder that when an opponent understands your boundaries, they can use those boundaries as weapons. And at that moment, the humiliation was as sharp and deliberate as any missile. At the far edge of the NATO formation, where the geometry of the patrol blurred into the open sky, a 7th aircraft flew in deliberate silence. It was not on the mission manifest. It carried no national markings, no squadron insignia, no identifying tailcode. The matte gray skin of the F-22 Raptor absorbed the sunlight instead of reflecting it, turning the jet into a shifting silhouette that seemed to vanish and reappear with the angle of the light. From a distance, it could have been mistaken for a trick of the eyes. Up close, it was unmistakably different from the NATO fighters it shadowed. Inside the cockpit, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, known to the few who remembered her as Phoenix, sat with her gloved hands steady on the controls. The helmet-mounted display projected a seamless fusion of radar, infrared, and electronic signals across her visor. Symbols and vectors floated in her vision without blocking the world beyond the glass. Her breathing was slow and controlled, her eyes moving with measured precision from one corner of the battle space to another. Phoenix's presence was not an accident. She had been inserted into the patrol under a classification level so high that even the other NATO pilots in the formation were unaware of her. Officially, She was still absent from active service, a legend relegated to rumor and speculation. Years earlier, she had flown combat missions that reshaped enemy air tactics in Syria and Iraq, and her kill record in Afghanistan had made her name known in briefing rooms on both sides of the conflict. Then, she had vanished from public rosters, the whispers of her reassignment growing more elaborate with each passing year. Her Raptor's systems were tuned for more than simple interception. In the past hour, she had been quietly collecting Iranian voice traffic, radar sweeps, and encrypted data bursts, a passive listener in a sea of noise. She let the algorithms sort patterns from chaos while she built her own mental map of the fight that had not yet started. She knew the Iranian pilots' formation changes, their relative fuel states, even the call sign of the Tomcat pilot who had made the barrel roll. The rest of the NATO formation moved like a marching band under orders not to play. But Phoenix was not bound to their music. Her mission parameters existed outside the diplomatic script. If the Iranian jets crossed the threshold from theater to threat, she was to remove them, quickly and without fanfare. She would leave no radar signature, no visible missile trails, no broadcast for the news anchors to narrate in real time. The Raptor's cockpit was a cocoon of ordered complexity. Screens showed stable readings. The quiet hum of electronics and the faint hiss of oxygen through her mask were the only sounds inside. Her posture was still, but it was not the stillness of passivity. It was the stillness of a predator in cover. Every muscle prepared for a single decisive movement. Below, the sea flashed white where shipwakes split the water. Above, the sun threw hard light across the NATO jets' canopies, their pilots still holding formation under the slow grind of humiliation. Phoenix's visor reflected none of it. The barrier between her and the outside world was more than physical. It was the separation of someone operating under a different set of rules entirely. She waited, tracking each Iranian move, letting the tension stretch thin. The most dangerous person in that sky was not the pilot pulling stunts for the cameras, nor the NATO leads bound by their orders. It was the one no one acknowledged, the one whose existence had been erased from records, the one who would decide when the performance ended. The Iranian squadron leader's voice crackled over his own network, sharp with confidence. In Phoenix's translated feed, the order was clear. All aircraft, prepare for synchronized maneuver. Begin approach in 3, 2, 1, high above the Persian Gulf. The 6 Iranian fighters began to shift, sliding into precise positions like pieces on a game board. The lead Tomcat angled slightly upward, 2 more falling into place just off each wingtip. The remaining 3 formed a trailing arc, each jet equidistant, their paths converging toward the NATO formation for what they clearly intended as a public curtain call. From her position at the rear, Phoenix watched it unfold through layers of data. Her helmet display outlined each aircraft in sharp geometry, streams of numbers feeding her every variable: speed, altitude, turn radius, relative bearing. In those figures, she saw the fatal flaw. For exactly 15 seconds, their trajectories would be fixed, their angles predictable to the millimeter. It was a display meant for cameras, not combat, and the maneuver's beauty was also its weakness. Her gloved fingers moved without hesitation, engaging systems in a sequence she had rehearsed 1,000 times. No one gave her clearance. She did not ask. The stick eased forward, and the Raptor's nose dipped into a controlled descent. The shift pressed her slightly into the harness, the steady hum of the engines rising as airflow wrapped over the fuselage. She felt, more than heard, the subtle change in tone as the jet slid from parade speed into the beginning of a hunt. From the NATO cockpits ahead, her movement registered as a blur of gray breaking from formation. Confusion rippled through the formation net. Unknown aircraft. Maintain position. Report status. Phoenix offered no reply. The clouds below drew closer, their surface bright under the midday sun, promising concealment. The Raptor met the cloud layer with a muffled rush, the outside world dissolving into white. Visibility vanished, replaced by the intimate glow of cockpit readouts and the steady cadence of her breathing. Here, in the folds of vapor, she was unseen and untouchable. Above, the Iranian formation continued its slow, choreographed encirclement, locked in their synchronized geometry, certain of their control over the moment. They didn't see the veil closing around them, or the predator slipping beneath it. Phoenix's course was set. Their arrogance had created the one opening she had been waiting for, and now the inevitability of what came next was no longer a question. It was simply a matter of seconds. Beneath the cover of clouds, Phoenix adjusted her throttle, the Raptor's engines humming in a low, restrained growl. Every movement of her hands was economical, exact. Her radar painted the Iranian formation above in perfect clarity. 6 targets, each highlighted with range, bearing, and closure rate. The stealth systems wrapped her in invisibility. To their instruments, she did not exist. She rose through the mist like a shadow taking form. Her first target was the squadron leader in the F-14 Tomcat, the same pilot who had paraded his aircraft through a taunting barrel roll. At lock tone, her thumb tapped the trigger. The AMRAAM burst from its bay with a deep, metallic thump, accelerating to Mach 4 in seconds. The missile's guidance code barely had time to adjust before impact. From the ships below, the live feeds caught only the sudden flash and rolling debris cloud as the Tomcat ceased to exist. Even before the fireball had faded, her second lock came alive. The F-4 Phantom escort, guilty of washing a typhoon with turbulent air, was mid-turn when its radar warning chirped. Too late. Another AMRAAM streaked upward from nowhere, slamming into its fuselage. A white blossom of shrapnel and flame replaced the jet, the shock wave rippling through the vapor above. Phoenix pivoted on her axis, the helmet display flowing into a new alignment. 2 more Iranian fighters were angling in for their part of the maneuver, still committed to formation spacing. She split her next pair of missiles, launching one left, one right. The twin detonations were almost synchronized. Twin orange suns against the pale sky. 4 aircraft gone in less than 30 seconds, and still not a single visual of the attacker. In the Iranian comms chatter, voices broke into overlapping panic. They shouted bearings, called out phantom missile trails, tried to re-establish control. Phoenix had no interest in their confusion. Her next target, an F-14 braking hard toward Iranian airspace, lit her display in yellow. She pushed the throttle forward, the Raptor surging ahead. At optimum range, the 5th AMRAAM punched free, arrowing into the fleeing Tomcat's tail. The jet came apart in mid-descent, fragments tumbling into the Gulf. One remained. The last F-4 Phantom was running flat out, afterburners flaring. Phoenix did not fire a missile. Instead, she closed the distance until the Phantom's metal skin filled her canopy. She could see the rivets in its tail, the slight shudder in its control surfaces. Her hand shifted to the Vulcan cannon controls. The first burst from the M61 tore through the Phantom's left engine. The second burst shredded its radar dish. The third clipped its right wingtip, sending the fighter into an uneven wobble. She wasn't ending him. She was dismantling him mid-flight, piece by piece, letting him feel the collapse of his aircraft under deliberate, surgical pressure. As the Phantom fell into a sluggish, spiraling descent, Phoenix slid alongside, canopy to canopy. Through the cracked transparency of his cockpit, the Iranian pilot stared at her. The mirrored surface of her visor reflected his own desperation back at him. She lifted one gloved hand from the stick and pointed directly at him, a wordless signal that survival was hers to grant. One final burst from the Vulcan ripped away his flight controls. The Phantom rolled over into an unrecoverable spin, forcing the pilot to eject. His parachute deployed, carrying him down toward the waves below. Phoenix banked away, disappearing once more into the cloud layer, leaving nothing but drifting smoke and the stunned silence of every NATO pilot who had just watched 6 enemies erased in under 90 seconds without a single radio call from the ghost in their formation. The NATO formation never broke its pattern. Even with 6 hostile aircraft gone, the remaining fighters held their assigned positions as if the engagement had never occurred. From each cockpit, pilots stared ahead, their instruments glowing in the midday light. Their faces impassive masks that hid the storm of disbelief underneath. Below, the surface of the Persian Gulf was scattered with drifting wreckage and faint plumes of smoke where aircraft had fallen. On naval vessels shadowing the patrol, camera operators tracked the scene through long lenses. The images fed directly into live news broadcasts, but without the attacker visible. The footage looked surreal. Viewers saw jets vanish in bursts of flame, then nothing but contrails dissolving into open air. In split-screen coverage, anchors sat beside defense analysts, replaying slow-motion clips and circling vapor trails that began and ended without explanation. Satellite imagery from commercial providers soon flooded online forums, bright orange blossoms against a calm blue sea, each isolated and clean. No sign of missile launch platforms or incoming aircraft. The absence of evidence became its own spectacle, sparking theories from advanced drone strikes to foreign sabotage. Social media platforms buzzed with edited clips, speculative overlays, and frame-by-frame dissections. Reporters swarmed Pentagon press briefings, asking the same questions in different ways. Were American aircraft involved? Did NATO authorize engagement? Spokespersons maintained a uniform answer. No comment on operational matters. No comment on rules of engagement. No comment on whether the United States had deployed F-22 Raptors to the region. In the classified corridors of the Pentagon, sealed files bearing no pilot's name were locked into vaults. Outside, the world was left with only the image of an empty sky where enemy jets had flown minutes before. For those who recognized the signature, the silence spoke louder than any statement. The vanishing act had worked. The message had been delivered without a single word. Iran's public posture in the days after the Persian Gulf incident was loud and uncompromising. State television replayed the surviving pilots' footage of the NATO formation over and over, framing the engagement as an unprovoked act of aerial aggression. Spokesmen demanded answers from NATO and the United States, warning that retaliation would be swift. Yet behind closed doors in Tehran, the tone shifted sharply. The Supreme Military Council gathered in a windowless chamber. The survivors' ejection seat, harness placed on the table like a relic. The pilot's account, delivered in clipped, halting detail, was unlike anything the council had heard. He described a gray Raptor that materialized behind him, so close he could see the pilot's visor. 6 aircraft destroyed in less than 2 minutes, each at the moment of greatest vulnerability. The final attack, a deliberate disabling instead of a kill, had been surgical and personal. His report was stamped with the highest classification and locked away. There would be no public acknowledgement of the details. Retaliation, they decided, was no longer a realistic option. In Brussels, NATO representatives issued carefully worded statements. All Allied aircraft had operated in accordance with established rules of engagement. There was no mention of an F-22, no mention of a lone pilot acting with autonomous precision. The language was intentionally bland, designed to let the news cycle move on while avoiding a direct challenge to Iran's narrative. But in military headquarters from Moscow to Beijing, analysts pored over the incident. Russian Air Force planners noted the absence of visible missile trails and the impossibility of tracking the attacker. Chinese intelligence officers compared it to recent reports from the South China Sea, where their own pilots had described mysterious losses and sudden mechanical failures. Both nations quietly issued new standing orders: avoid close proximity maneuvers with American aircraft, especially in international airspace. In Iranian squadrons, instructors rewrote training syllabi to emphasize unpredictability in formation flying. Pilots were told never to linger in synchronized maneuvers, even during ceremonial displays. The lesson had spread without an official briefing. Fear was already shaping tactics. The incident also altered the psychological terrain. Enemy pilots spoke of the ghost in ready rooms, a figure who could not be tracked, who attacked without warning and then vanished. Commanders noticed heightened stress levels before patrols near American forces. Flight surgeons began recording increased heart rates and higher blood pressure readings during pre-mission checks. In Western intelligence circles, the effect was noted with quiet satisfaction. The blacked-out intelligence reports, thick with redactions, became as much a tool as the mission itself. Every blank line suggested capabilities too sensitive to reveal, feeding speculation and amplifying deterrence. No further missiles needed to be fired. The airspace over the Persian Gulf became calmer, the provocations less frequent. Across 3 continents, the lesson of that day traveled in whispers. A single pilot, unseen and unnamed, had shifted the behavior of nations. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell's career had begun with a cadence that seemed destined for the record books. At the Air Force Academy, she earned a reputation for precision flying that instructors compared to instinct rather than learned skill. Her call sign, Phoenix, was born in those years partly for her ability to recover from errors that would have ended lesser pilots, partly for the way she seemed to draw strength from pressure. She cut her teeth in the F-16 over Iraq, running combat air patrols and ground strike missions that demanded rapid adaptation. Colleagues remembered her as the one who could read a battle space like a chessboard, always thinking several moves ahead. That talent earned her an invitation to the F-22 program long before most pilots her age could even qualify. The real turning point came over eastern Syria on a night mission targeting a convoy suspected of moving chemical weapons. Phoenix and her wingman were tasked with destroying it before it crossed into a populated area. Everything went according to plan until multiple surface-to-air missiles lit up the dark horizon. Phoenix jinked hard and dropped flares, her aircraft vanishing from enemy radar. Her wingman wasn't as fortunate. His Raptor took a direct hit and began bleeding altitude, spiraling toward unforgiving desert. His voice over the radio was steady but strained, telling her both engines were dead and he was losing hydraulics. Every procedure demanded she climb out and call for a recovery team. Every order on the book said she should keep her aircraft safe. She ignored all of it, banking hard. She dropped to low altitude, using her M61 cannon to strafe a patch of desert clear of debris. The landing she executed should have been impossible on that terrain. But the Raptor held together long enough for her to shut down and drag her wingman clear. The recovery operation that followed was massive and dangerous, pulling 2 stealth fighters out before Syrian or Russian forces could close in. Officially, her decision was a breach of discipline that damaged irreplaceable equipment. Unofficially, it was the reason 2 pilots came home alive. The court-martial that followed was sealed so tightly that even her name was redacted in summary reports. She was quietly transferred to a program that had no designation, no patch, and no roster. From then on, she flew missions that didn't exist, operating from hangars with no markings, on bases that did not appear on maps. Life as a ghost pilot stripped away everything personal. Friends faded from her life. Family believed the cover story that she had died in a training accident. Her quarters were a single room with a steel bed and a locker. Every possession was functional save for one thing. In the back of her locker sat the helmet from that Syria mission, its visor still scratched from desert grit. She kept it as a reminder that her career had burned one life to save another. Over the years, she became a weapon deployed only when failure was unacceptable. Reconnaissance over North Korea, interdiction in the Horn of Africa, quiet interventions in places where open war would have made headlines. Her call sign passed in whispers among pilots who had seen the gray Raptor appear, eliminate a threat, and vanish before they could key a mic. The Persian Gulf engagement would be her most public and most invisible mission. 6 aircraft downed in under 2 minutes. 1 survivor spared not out of mercy, but as a living warning. And then she was gone, disappearing into cloud as if she had never been there. In the months that followed, Iranian pilots altered their patrol patterns. Chinese and Russian aviators flew with a caution they had never shown before. Across every potential flashpoint, there was the same unspoken question: was Phoenix watching? In a world of data and machines, she had proved that a single human with the will to act could change the balance of power. Somewhere, perhaps over another contested sea or hostile border, an unmarked F-22 might still be cutting through the sky. And inside, behind a dark visor, a woman might be watching and waiting, choosing whether today is the day she rises again.